Hey folks, welcome back to Build at Home. I'm your host Ricky Camilleri, coming to you from my home in Bushwick, Brooklyn, and I am talking to the great Wagner Moura in his home in Los Angeles. He's here to talk about his new film, Sergio, about the UN diplomat Sergio Vieira de Mello, which is coming to Netflix quite soon. Wagner, before we get into it, I just want to say, as we do at the top of all these interviews, that over 700 million school lunches have gone missing for children across the country due to school closures because of the coronavirus. If you would like to find out how you can help get these kids the meals that they need, please go to nokidhungry.org where you can find out how to volunteer, how to donate. It's nokidhungry.org.
I'll definitely do that,
Oh,
Ricky.
thanks, Wagner. It was for the audience, but that's great that you're going to go too. Great.
I'll do that. I'll do that for sure. This has been, first of all, thanks for having me here. And then,
Of course.
but this has been the biggest challenge, I think, of all this crisis. What actually, when all this began, I started to, my first weeks were like very, I was working in Mexico and then I came to LA, came back home. And my first weeks were really good. I felt, I was, with my kids at home, and then and that in these first weeks were the weeks that I really realized what kind of crisis is this? This is and especially when I heard the connection that I have with Brazil and the news that I receive from a country that's more vulnerable, like many others, and with a kind of with that lunatic as a president. It's a crisis that will affect really, really strongly the most vulnerable
Absolutely.
people in the world. And this is what really we are privileged people to, we can stay at home, we can work from home, we can, so this is a very the things that I've been trying to do is exactly like to try to participate and to enjoy and to engage as much as I can in things like this one that you just mentioned.
I have to ask, as a person from Brazil, how much can you actually take of what your president says on a daily basis or on a weekly basis about the virus? Because as an American right now, with our maniac in the White House, I have a hard time taking
Yeah.
the daily onslaught of misinformation that is being peppered into our brains.
It is even worse, Ricky, because Trump, it's the institutions in the U.S. are strong enough, I
Hmm.
think, to hold uh, any. It's difficult to have a president like Donald Trump, I think, but it's the institutions in the U.S. are very strong, so he can't do whatever he wants. It's in Brazil. It's we our democracy is kind of young. We were under a very heavy dictatorship from 64 to 85, so there are things that are easier to someone like Bolsonaro to
Right.
do. So yeah, it's bad.
Yeah. Speaking of institutions, Sergio, your new film, which is coming to Netflix, is, as I said at the top of this, about a UN diplomat who rose ranks. He was a diplomat for 34 years. He unfortunately passed away in a bombing in Baghdad in 2003, the bombing of the UN embassy. What made you want to take on the role of Sergio? What drew your interest to this?
I was always very fascinated by the UN. Since I was a kid, I thought that the United Nations was, and with everything. I mean, how weak the UN can be,
Mhm.
and how vulnerable the UN is. For example, when our film is pretty much based on when in the aftermath of the invasion of when the U.S. invaded Iraq, and the UN was openly against the invasion, and Sergio himself was personally against it, and he actually denied going there four times, but they had to be there. So all these contradictions of the UN always fascinated me. I mean, an organization which is ultimately a human rights organization that has to operate under very pragmatic circumstances, or
Mhm.
it's like you see like nowadays, like yesterday, Trump blocking the financial aid to the
To
to
who?
the to yeah to who and so we it's all this dynamic always interested me, and Sergio was someone who in the end of his life, like when he was in Iraq, that contradiction was very exposed, in the way he was dealing with the way he didn't want, as you could see in the film, the UN to be people to think that the UN was, there in Iraq to help the coalition. And so I think that the film is full of these contradictions. And of course, in a moment like this, uh, to have the example of a world leader like Sergio, because he was supposed to be the next Secretary General after Kofi Annan, and to have someone like him as a template of how a world leader should behave in a moment of crisis, or I mean, considering that this crisis is exposing how weak are most of the world leaders nowadays. I think it's interesting. We of course we didn't plan to release this film now, but but a film is always an interaction of what an artist wanted to say with this specific particular audience that receives the film in a particular time frame in history. So it's the fact that we are releasing this film now, it's says something about values, high values. I think which in the end of the day, at the end of the day, this is what I think it's lacking. Whatever Sergio did was led by high, very elevated values.
And we see, and as you said, though, like he is a practical leader in a way. His values sometimes are in conflict with the practical leadership that he has to abide by it. And I love the sequence, or the reoccurring sequence, because it's told in flashbacks, of him in East Timor, where he is dealing with the leader, the sort of, is it a rebel faction in East Timor that like
Mm-hmm.
obviously like other members of the United Nations don't want him dealing with, possibly other leaders in the world don't want
Yeah,
him dealing with, but he sees it as the only clear pathway forward for
yeah,
any kind of like peaceful end to there's like a civil war happening there, excuse me, I'm not the
yeah.
largest history, but the
Yes,
only
exactly. Yeah,
clear end to violence and suffering and like destitute poverty is by in some way aligning himself with these leaders.
yeah.
That's an incredible example of what you're talking about.
Someone said that his biography would be called "War Criminals, My Friends,"
Right.
because
Yeah.
because Sergio was, he was the first UN person to have a meeting with the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, and yeah, he was very pragmatic. He was a very pragmatic. He saw, even he was, when he died, he was the High Commissioner, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and he saw human rights itself as with a very pragmatic point of view. He used to be an idealistic when he was part of the movements in '68 in Paris and the riots and everything. But with time, which I think it's something that might happen to most of us
Yeah.
when we get older, we become a little more pragmatic. He became very pragmatic, and he was considered one of the greatest negotiators at the UN. But at the same time, uh, the values, like I said, were always there. If I had to summarize what this film is about, I would say this film is about empathy.
Hmm.
Which was the biggest quality that Sergio had, the capacity of looking at people as people. He could look at George Bush and at the janitor of his office with the same kind of interest. He was interested, and he could see people as people, not as numbers or statistics. I think this is a very important thing, and I think that this is lacking strongly nowadays in our daily lives, and of course in the lives of the ones who are leading countries. And
Yeah, they seem to be far more aligned with ideology than they are with humanistic side. Speaking of Sergio's humanist side, the scene where in East Timor, when you meet with a woman that Ana de Armas introduces you to for her micro lending shop, it is such a
Hmm.
beautiful moment, so well
Yeah.
written, and your performance is incredible. Can you talk about just shooting that scene and what that phrase what meant to you? Because
Yes.
I've never been to East Timor. I've never worked in micro lending, but that
Yeah.
phrase meant so much to me. It's a universal feeling, I think.
Isn't that amazing? I love this.
Yeah.
That for that's I love that scene. It's great that you brought that up because I one of the greatest things in this film for me was the first of all, I'm very interested in producing. I was one of the producers of this film, and I'm very interested in producing films that, especially, I mean, me being a Latin man, to make films about Latinos or people from all over the world that don't reinforce stereotypes. And I think that this film about a UN man, which with actors from, all over the world, and shot in different countries. And so in that particular day, we brought all of these people that you saw in that village. They are from East Timor. We
Wow.
brought them from East Timor. We shot it in Thailand, but we brought all of them from East Timor, and they are, of course, very familiar and to who Sergio was. Many of them knew Sergio, and Sergio is a very important person in the history of that country. And so with that scene specifically, we chose that actress. That was the most difficult cast I think we had in the film
Wow.
because she's not an actress. She's a teacher in East Timor, and what she says there is something that a woman really said to Sergio in Bosnia. And but it's such a crazy line and such an elaborated way of thinking that we were a little concerned if that would be something that would go naturally in someone's mouth. And
Mm.
then but when she said that, we didn't rehearse that scene. When she did it, uh, uh, it came from a very personal point of view because she had lost many of people from her family in the independence war in East Timor. And so what you see there, I'm not acting. I'm not like, I'm just watching her saying those things, and what she said really, really moved me
Wow.
as a person, because I could see that was coming from, she was saying those lines, which were lines, but it was coming from a very deep place of her experience as a human being. So yeah, I love that scene. I love the fact that she's from East Timor, that most of the extras in that scene are Timoreses, and we also did that with in the scenes after the bombing, where Anna's character is looking for Sergio in the rubble. Most of those extras there are from Iraq. So there was a lot of reality and truth in what was going on there.
Um, was there a part of you that took on? You said that you had an interest in the UN, but this feels like the absolute opposite from Pablo Escobar in a way, in the sense that this man is athletic, he works out, he's not gluttonous, and he's not a killer. He's a humanist. Was
Yeah.
that part of the choice? Was that part of the reason that you wanted to take on the role of Sergio?
No, no. Like I said, I'm very interested I mean, Narcos was a very important thing for me in many
Of
different
course.
ways. I mean, it was important for my career. I mean, people started to pay attention in what I was doing, but also personally, it was very important for me to understand what the drug trade, how it began. It affects a lot. South America and countries that produce and export drugs. So to understand how it began and to have a clear vision of how absurd the war on drugs thing is, how that it's only a way to exercise social control
Yes.
over this, people over in poor neighborhoods, and it's so it was very important for me in many different ways, as a Brazilian man, speaking Spanish and different. It was a lot of, so it was very important for me. But having said that, I think that the way Latinos are represented in Hollywood, in the films in the U.S. are still it's still very. First of all, we are very subrepresented. We are the amount of characters in Latinos in the American films doesn't represent the amount of what we have of what we really are in the American society, and also I think the way the characters are shown is a stereotype. It's always like the violent dude or the criminals or the sexy Latina, blah, blah. And I think that it's up to us also to kind of try to change that perception.
Yeah.
So Sergio was kind of more like for me, like a first step in a sort of ambitious and political idea of trying to make films about not necessarily characters based on real people, but characters that are in different roles, in different positions that could be more like understood of what American society really is, where I remember when I saw Diego Luna on that Star Wars film, being the lead man in that film, Rogue One, and speaking with this Mexican accent, I was very happy, and I felt very I felt represented. I felt that well we could be, Latinos can be also the main guys because we are an important part of the society.
Yeah, representation is so, as much as we talk about it, it's so often taken for granted, especially by people like me who have been represented very easily in America their whole life. It's like I
Yeah.
can stand by it and I can say more representation needs to be happened, but I will never know what it's like to be underrepresented minority in this country and to not see myself on screen. I
Yeah.
can't imagine what that feels like.
Yeah, I think it's important for, especially for new, generations and kids that could. I mean, can you imagine like a Mexican or American kid that from Mexican parents that when they saw Diego playing Star Wars, I think that's a very important thing. So yeah, so I think that Sergio was sort of part of this little thing that I think that I could that I I'm committed in in doing. I think it's and Sergio is a very he's not that known in Brazil, for
Yeah.
example. I think he was a very important as a Brazilian. I wanted people to know who that guy was.
He's not that but he is Brazilian. How come he isn't very well known in Brazil?
He's not. I mean, it's I don't know. It's the UN or the
Right.
it's not diplomats are not the most popular.
Right. It's not that not as popular as they should be, I will say that.
As they should be, exactly. Yeah, they should
Yeah.
be more popular, I think.
Talk a little bit about your supporting cast here, Ana de Armas, who I
Oh,
say supporting, but actually, I mean, she's on screen
yeah,
almost as much as you are. How
yeah.
did you come about casting her?
She One of the actors of the film is a German actor called Clement Schick, who is a very good friend of mine. Had worked with Anna before, And one of our producers, Daniel Dreyfus, also he was always saying Anna should play this character. I have to say I wasn't familiar with Anna. I didn't know who Anna was. I
Hmm.
hadn't seen the Blade Runner film,
Hmm.
and but of course I met her, and I had an instant, immediate connection with her. She's a very grounded woman. She's Cuban, and of course the fact that we were the Latinos in the film, I think that we had a very we could, there was something that we could share culturally, and so I had a very good connection with her. And then while we were doing the film, I realized that she's an amazing actress.
Yeah.
She's really good actress, and so I think that she's great in a film, and I think that we couldn't be happier. And she's having a great moment right now in her career after uh, Knives Out, and she's gonna play Marilyn Monroe in a film,
Yeah. The Andrew
which
Dominic film.
exactly. So talking about representation, how cool is a Cuban a Cuban actress playing the most important icon of American filmmaking? So it was
There's
great.
a
We were really glad to have Anna in the film.
there's another cast member of in a very small part in the movie who I love. I've seen him in things over the years. That's Garrett Dillahunt, and
Yeah,
he shows up for like a very small part in the movie, but he's so great. How did that
he's so
happen?
great. He's so great. I mean, we are so happy with the cast we have Bradley Whitford.
Oh,
It's
that's right. Yeah.
Brian Garrett. And I mean, as we were shooting in this different locations, so we were all of us together in Thailand and Jordan, some of us were in Brazil. We really had time to hang out together, and it was I couldn't be happier about how cool these people are, and how great actors they are. I was very blessed to be working with them. Garrett is amazing, and we were doing this the scenes where that I have with him were the most difficult scenes for me in the film, which are the scenes in the rubble when Sergio is basically dying. So those were difficult scenes, and it was amazing to have Will and Garrett and Brian in there with me.
How did you guys stage the rubble, the aftermath of the bombing? Because it's incredible looking, and it's not shot in very small close-ups or anything. It really looks like you had a wide space to create that set.
It is it's we did it in a studio in Bangkok, and
Wow.
so yes, it wasn't like in a real location, so it was we could. But even though it wasn't comfortable at all, we were Brian and I, we were like in that very bad position. With it was hot in there, the whole crew had to be you know confined in that little space. It wasn't easy at all. It was those were the most difficult scenes, I think, of the film.
Before I let you go, Wagner, I kind of touched on this, but what would you like audiences to take away from Sergio, considering it's about a humanist diplomat, and we're watching it in the midst of this moment?
Yes, I think that especially considering the moment we are living now, I think it's interesting to compare Sergio with the leaders that we have nowadays, and so we can realize what are the qualities that we want leaders to have. And I think, and when I see Sergio, and when I see how he behaved as a world leader, as a negotiator, uh, I'm like, this is the kind of when every time. But in the end of the day, I think again, this is a film about empathy, which I think
Mm,
it's the most important quality a world leader should have. And I think for sure the world is going to change completely
yeah.
after this. I personally think that it's obvious a strong crisis of capitalism itself.
Yep.
I don't know what this is gonna be, how this is gonna be after the crisis. I've been reading interesting news. I read something about Amsterdam now, and how the mayor of Amsterdam is starting to think about new policies of including people, of respecting labor laws, or environmental laws, and so things that I think that will make capitalism more humanistic in a way. But for sure, I don't know in which direction, but for sure, we are going to go through a post-capitalism, and I think that the direction I would like the world to go is like something I see a lot in someone like Sergio Vieira de Mello. Humanistic point of view, to see, to get closer, to see people as people, to have a more empathetic look over other people.
You would hope that we're going to go through some sort of post-capitalist, at least thought process for a little while following this. One could at least hope as an American.
Yeah. It's not gonna be fast, but I think this is gonna change.
It's been such a pleasure talking to you. Congratulations again on Sergio. When can audiences see it? When is it hitting Netflix?
It's Friday now. It's Friday, April 17th. Yeah, this Friday.
So tomorrow, audiences check out Wagner Moura,
yeah.
and tomorrow, or I guess maybe later to 3 o'clock in the morning tonight, something along those lines. It will be there when you wake up in the morning. Thanks so much for talking to me. And, please stay healthy, stay safe.
Likewise, Ricky. It was great to talk to you, man. Take care.
Take care.